Dawn in Utah Territory painted the red rock canyons in shades of fire and gold, but Catherine Sullivan barely noticed the beauty anymore. At 34, she'd learned to see mornings as just another collection of hours to fill with endless ranch work. Another day to survive in the 2 years since her husband's death had left her alone with 800 acres and dwindling hope. She stepped onto the wooden porch of her modest ranch house, coffee steaming in her chapped hands, and surveyed the land that had once felt like paradise. Now it felt more like purgatory, beautiful, vast, and impossibly lonely. The cattle were grazing peacefully in the north pasture. The horses moved lazily in the corral, and everything looked exactly as it should on another quiet morning. Catherine had learned to find comfort in routine, in the predictable rhythm of feeding animals, mending fences, and maintaining the illusion that she could handle this life alone. Then she heard it, a sound that didn't belong in her. Carefully ordered world, a rhythmic pounding against the wooden fence that bordered her property. Not the gentle bump of cattle seeking better grass, not the scratch of a branch blown by wind. This was deliberate, desperate, urgent. Catherine set down her coffee and walked toward the sound, her boots crunching on the frost-covered ground. As she rounded the corner of the barn, she stopped dead in her tracks. A mountain lion, a large female by the look of her, was pressed against the fence, her powerful body heaving with exhaustion. Dark blood matted the golden fur along her left shoulder and flank, and her amber eyes held a wild desperation that Catherine recognized with shocking clarity. The animal's breathing was labored, each exhale visible in the cold morning air. She'd clearly traveled far, and whatever had injured her was serious, enough to drive her from her natural territory into the dangerous proximity of human habitation. Catherine's first instinct was what any sensible ranchers would be: retreat to the house, grab her rifle, and eliminate the threat. Mountain lions were killers, cattle thieves, dangers to everything she was trying to protect. But something in those amber eyes stopped her. The Puma wasn't looking at Catherine with predatory calculation or territorial aggression. Those eyes held pain, yes, but also something else, a plea that went beyond species, beyond the natural order of predator and prey. It was the look of a creature at the end of its strength, asking for the one thing the wilderness couldn't provide: mercy. Catherine found herself taking a step closer to the fence, then another. The Puma's muscles tensed, ready to flee, but she didn't move away from the barrier between them. "Easy, girl," Catherine whispered, using the same tone she'd once used with skittish horses. "I see you there." "I see how hurt you are." The Puma's ears flicked forward at the sound of her voice, not threatening but listening. Catherine realized she was looking at a mother, probably separated from cubs she was trying to return to, driven by maternal instinct even while her own body was failing. Standing there in the early morning light, Catherine felt something stir in her chest that had been dormant since James's death: the urge to help, to heal, to open her heart to something beyond her own grief. Any rational person would have walked away. Any experienced rancher would have seen only the danger. But Catherine Sullivan had spent 2 years being rational, being careful, being safe. And it had brought her nothing but isolation and slowly dying hope. She walked to the gate. Catherine's hand rested on the gate latch, trembling not from cold but from the magnitude of what she was contemplating. The wounded Puma watched her through amber eyes that seemed to hold their breath, as if sensing that this moment would determine whether she lived or died. "This is crazy," Catherine whispered to herself. Words she'd spoken 1,000 times since James's death whenever she'd considered taking risks, hiring help she couldn't afford, investing in improvements that might fail, opening herself to neighbors who might reject her efforts at friendship. But crazy had become a relative concept in her solitary life. She thought of James, who'd always said that courage wasn't the absence of fear but action despite it. He'd demonstrated that philosophy when he'd proposed to a woman everyone said was too independent, too outspoken for frontier life. He'd shown it again when they'd bought this land that everyone called too remote, too challenging for a young couple to manage. "What would you do, James?" she asked the morning air, and somehow she already knew the answer. James had never turned away from anything that needed help: injured animals, struggling neighbors, even Catherine herself when she'd arrived in Utah Territory, running from a life that had never fit her. The Puma shifted against the fence, her breathing becoming more labored. Blood was seeping through her fur, and Catherine realized that whatever had happened, a fight with another predator, a fall, a hunter's trap, the animal was running out of time. Catherine unlatched the gate. The puma's eyes widened as the barrier swung open, but she didn't move immediately. For a long moment, woman and mountain lion regarded each other across 3 feet of space that might as well have been an ocean. "I'm not going to hurt you," Catherine said softly, "but I can't help you if you don't trust me." Trust. The word hung in the air between them, loaded with irony. Catherine hadn't trusted anyone since James died, hadn't allowed herself to be vulnerable to disappointment or loss. Yet here she was, asking a wild predator to do what she couldn't. The puma took a tentative step through the gate, then another. Her movements were stiff, painful but determined. Catherine backed away slowly, giving the animal space while leading her toward the barn where she kept veterinary supplies for her livestock. "That's it," Catherine encouraged. "Just a little further." The barn was dimly lit and filled with the comforting sense of hay and leather. Catherine had set up a corner with clean straw, where she'd once helped a horse recover from a difficult foaling. She gestured toward it now, hoping the puma would understand. To her amazement, the mountain lion seemed to grasp the offering. She moved carefully to the prepared area and settled down with a soft grunt of pain, her amber eyes never leaving Catherine's face. Catherine knelt at the edge of the straw, close enough to help, but far enough to avoid seeming threatening. "Let me look at those wounds," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. The puma's injuries were serious but not life-threatening. Deep scratches along her shoulder and a gash on her flank that would need cleaning and care. Catherine had treated similar wounds on cattle and horses, but never on a predator who could kill her with a single swipe of powerful claws. "This might hurt," Catherine warned, reaching for her medical supplies. As she began to clean the wounds with gentle efficiency, the puma remained remarkably still. Occasionally a small rumble would escape her throat, not threatening but communicative, as if she were trying to tell Catherine her story. "I know," Catherine murmured as she worked. "I know it hurts, but healing always does." The words seemed to apply to more than just physical wounds. As Catherine tended to this broken creature, she felt something shifting inside herself. Walls she'd built around her heart beginning to crack, protective isolation giving way to the risky business of caring again. When the wounds were clean and bandaged, Catherine sat back on her heels and studied her unlikely patient. The puma's breathing had eased and some of the wild desperation had left her eyes. "What happens now?" Catherine asked, though she wasn't sure if she was addressing the mountain lion or herself. 3 days had passed since Catherine opened her gate to the wounded puma, and her entire routine had been transformed. She'd named the mountain lion Sierra, after the distant peaks visible from her porch, though she'd been careful not to say the name aloud, as if speaking it might make the attachment too real. Sierra had proven to be a remarkably considerate patient. She stayed in the barn during daylight hours, emerging only at dusk to drink from the water Catherine provided, and to prowl carefully around the immediate area of the house. The puma seemed to understand the boundaries of sanctuary, never approaching the livestock, never venturing far enough to alarm the horses, always returning to her straw bed before dawn. Catherine found herself looking forward to these evening visits more than she cared to admit. She'd taken to sitting on her porch after supper, ostensibly to watch the sunset, but really to observe Sierra's careful explorations of her temporary territory. "You're healing well," Catherine told her on the 3rd evening, noting how much more fluidly the puma moved. The bandages were holding. The wounds showed no signs of infection, and Sierra's appetite had returned. Catherine had been leaving portions of meat from her own meals, reasoning that a recovering predator needed protein more than she did. Sierra settled herself about 20 feet from the porch, close enough for conversation but far enough to maintain dignity. Her amber eyes reflected the last light of day as she regarded Catherine with what seemed like curiosity rather than wariness. "I suppose you're wondering why I helped you," Catherine continued, surprised by how natural it felt to talk to her unusual companion. "Truth is, I'm wondering the same thing." A memory surfaced, James 2 weeks before his death, sitting in this same spot and talking about the wildlife they'd observed on the ranch. "Every creature's got its place in the balance," he'd said. "Even the ones that scare us. Maybe especially those ones." Catherine had argued with him then, pointing out the practical dangers of predators to their livestock. Now, watching Sierra's peaceful presence, she wondered if James had understood something she was only beginning to grasp. The sound of approaching horses interrupted her reverie. Catherine tensed, recognizing the hoofbeats of multiple riders moving at speed. Sierra immediately melted into the shadows behind the barn, her survival instincts intact despite her injuries. 3 men rode into Catherine's yard as the last light faded, her neighbors Tom Bradley and his son Marcus, along with Sheriff Coleman from the territorial seat. All were armed, all looked grim. "Evening, Catherine," Tom called out, dismounting near her porch. "Sorry to bother you, but we've got a situation." "What kind of situation?" Catherine asked, though her stomach was already sinking with apprehension. "Mountain lions been spotted in the area," Sheriff Coleman explained. "Killed 2 calves on the Henderson place yesterday, spooked the horses at Miller's ranch this morning. We're tracking it before it does more damage." Marcus, barely 18 and eager to prove himself, gestured toward the ground near Catherine's barn. "Trail leads right up to your property, Mrs. Sullivan. You seen anything unusual?" Catherine's mouth went dry. The tracks would be everywhere. 3 days of Sierra moving around the barn area, drinking from the water trough, exploring the safe boundaries Catherine had unconsciously established. She began, then stopped. What could she possibly say that wouldn't sound like madness? That she'd not only seen the mountain lion but was actively harboring it? That she'd opened her heart to the very creature they were hunting? "Catherine?" Tom prompted, his voice gentle but concerned. "You look pale. This cat's got you spooked?" She realized she had a choice to make. She could tell them the truth and watch them hunt down Sierra, or she could lie and risk everything she'd built in this community on a predator who might vanish the moment she was fully healed. "I heard something a few nights ago," Catherine said carefully. "Might have been a cat, might have been anything, but I haven't seen any actual damage to my livestock. It wasn't exactly a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either." Sheriff Coleman studied her face in the gathering darkness, his expression unreadable. "Mind if we take a look around, just to be safe?" Catherine's heart hammered against her ribs. "Of course, though it's getting pretty dark for tracking." As the men spread out to examine her property, Catherine sent a silent prayer into the shadows where Sierra had vanished. "Stay hidden. Stay safe. Don't make me choose between you and everything else I have left." The search party found tracks just as Catherine had known they would. But Sierra's recent injuries had caused her to favor certain paths, and the trail they discovered led away from the ranch toward the canyon country to the east, exactly the opposite direction from where she was actually hiding. "Looks like she was just passing through," Sheriff Coleman concluded after an hour of examination by lantern light. "Probably heading back to the high country where she belongs. Still, you should be careful, Catherine," Tom Bradley added, his paternal concern evident. "Keep your livestock close and your rifle closer. Mountain lions can double back when they're desperate." After the men rode away, Catherine waited a full hour before venturing toward the barn. She found Sierra exactly where she'd expected, in the back stall, pressed low against the wall, every muscle coiled for flight. "They're gone," Catherine said softly. "You can come out now." Sierra emerged slowly, her amber eyes reflecting the lantern light as she studied Catherine's face with what seemed like newfound understanding. The Puma had witnessed Catherine's choice, had seen her deflect suspicion away from the barn, had been protected by this human's decision to risk her own standing in the community. "I know what you're thinking," Catherine said, settling onto a hay bale where Sierra could see her clearly. "You're wondering why I didn't tell them about you? Why I chose to protect something that could destroy everything I've worked for?" Sierra approached closer than she ever had before, settling herself just beyond arm's reach. Her rumbling purr was barely audible, but Catherine felt it more than heard it, a vibration of gratitude that seemed to resonate in her own chest. "The truth is, I need you as much as you need me," Catherine admitted, words she'd never spoken aloud before. "Not for anything practical. God knows you're nothing but trouble from that perspective. But you've given me something I thought I'd lost forever." She paused, trying to find words for feelings she barely understood herself. "When James died, I thought the part of me that could love dangerous things died with him. I built walls, kept everyone at safe distances, convinced myself that self-preservation was the same thing as strength." Catherine's voice caught slightly. "But watching you fight to survive, seeing you trust me enough to heal in my barn, It reminded me that some things are worth the risk. Sierra's purr deepened, and she moved closer still, close enough that Catherine could see the individual whiskers twitching with each breath, close enough to count the darker spots hidden in golden fur. I don't know what happens next, Catherine continued. You'll heal completely soon and you'll need to return to the wild. That's where you belong. But until then, she reached out slowly, giving Sierra every opportunity to retreat. Instead, the mountain lion stretched her neck forward, allowing Catherine's fingers to brush against the soft fur behind her ears. The contact was electric, not from fear, but from the profound intimacy of trust between species that had no evolutionary reason to trust each other. Catherine felt tears she'd held back for months finally spill over, not from sadness but from the overwhelming relief of connection. "Thank you," she whispered, "for reminding me that my heart isn't as broken as I thought." That night, Catherine made a decision that would have scandalized her neighbors and terrified any sensible person. She brought Sierra into the house, not into the main living area, that would have been madness, but the enclosed back porch with its warmth and comfort seemed like a reasonable compromise for a recovering patient who'd just proven her trustworthiness. Sierra explored the space carefully, sniffing at corners and testing surfaces before settling onto the thick rug Catherine had placed near the window. From there, she could watch the night landscape while remaining warm and protected. "Good night, Sierra," Catherine said softly, using the name aloud for the first time. The Puma's ears flicked in response, and Catherine could have sworn she saw understanding in those amber eyes. Recognition not just of the name, but of the significance of being named at all. As Catherine lay in her own bed just beyond the thin wall, she listened to Sierra's quiet breathing and felt something she hadn't experienced since James's death: the profound comfort of not being alone. 2 weeks had transformed Catherine's solitary existence into something she'd never imagined possible. Sierra's wounds had healed completely. Her strength had returned, and yet she showed no inclination to leave the sanctuary Catherine had provided. Instead, she'd established a routine that defied everything Catherine thought she knew about wild predators. Each morning, Sierra would disappear into the canyon country before dawn, returning at dusk with the easy confidence of a creature who knew she had a home to return to. She never brought her kills near the ranch, never threatened the livestock, and somehow managed to remain invisible to neighboring ranchers who occasionally rode through the area. "You're playing a dangerous game," Catherine told her one evening, as they shared their customary sunset watch from the porch. "Sooner or later, someone's going to see you." Sierra, now completely comfortable with Catherine's presence, had taken to sleeping on the porch itself rather than in the barn. She raised her great head from her paws and fixed Catherine with that direct amber gaze that seemed to say, "Let them see." Catherine was beginning to understand that Sierra's presence was changing more than just her daily routine. The confidence she'd gained from caring for the mountain lion had started spilling over into other areas of her life. She'd repaired fences she'd been putting off for months, reorganized the barn with an efficiency that surprised her, and even started planning improvements to the ranch that she'd abandoned after James's death. "You've made me remember something," Catherine told Sierra. "James used to say that the best parts of life were always a little dangerous. Safe was just another word for half alive." The test of their bond came 3 days later when Catherine woke to the sound of cattle lowing in distress. She rushed outside to find her small herd milling nervously in the pre-dawn darkness, clearly agitated by some threat. Then she saw it, a massive male mountain lion, larger than Sierra, prowling the edge of the corral where Catherine kept her horses. This wasn't an injured creature seeking help. This was a dominant predator exploring new territory, assessing what might be available for taking. Catherine's blood ran cold as she realized the implications. If this male killed her livestock, if neighbors found evidence of mountain lion predation on her property, they'd organize a hunting party that would target any big cat in the area, including Sierra. She grabbed her rifle and stepped onto the porch. But before she could decide what to do, Sierra appeared from the shadows. The female mountain lion moved with deadly purpose, positioning herself between the male and Catherine's animals. What followed was a confrontation unlike anything Catherine had ever witnessed. Sierra didn't attack immediately. Instead, she engaged in a complex territorial display, her body language communicating boundaries and consequences to the intruding male. The male was larger and stronger, but Sierra had something he lacked. She was defending something precious. Her stance made it clear that any attempt to take Catherine's livestock would have to go through her first. For tense minutes, the two predators faced each other while Catherine held her breath. Then remarkably, the male retreated. Not from fear, but from recognition that this territory was already claimed, already protected by a guardian who wouldn't yield. As the intruder disappeared into the canyon darkness, Sierra turned to look at Catherine with what could only be described as satisfaction. She just risked her life to protect Catherine's livelihood, choosing human companionship over her own species. Sierra, Catherine breathed, setting down her rifle with trembling hands. You didn't have to do that. But even as she spoke, Catherine realized that Sierra absolutely had to do that. The mountain lion had found something worth defending, something that transcended the simple survival instincts of the wild. She'd chosen to make Catherine's ranch her territory in the deepest sense, not just a place to rest and heal, but a home to protect. The next morning brought unexpected visitors, Tom Bradley and his son Marcus, along with a territorial wildlife official Catherine had never met. Morning. Catherine, Tom called out, his tone unusually formal. This is Agent Morrison from the territorial office. He's here about the mountain lion situation. Agent Morrison was a lean man with sharp eyes and the bearing of someone accustomed to authority. Mrs. Sullivan, we've received reports of unusual mountain lion activity in this area. I need to ask you some direct questions. Catherine felt her heart sink. Someone had seen something or suspected something, and now her careful protection of Sierra was about to be tested in ways she hadn't anticipated. Of course, she said, hoping her voice sounded steadier than she felt. Have you observed any mountain lions on or near your property in the past month? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Catherine could feel Sierra's presence somewhere nearby, probably watching from cover, assessing this new threat to their unlikely partnership. Once again, Catherine faced the choice between truth and protection, between community acceptance and the wild bond that had restored her faith in love itself. Catherine stood on her porch facing Agent Morrison, acutely aware that Sierra was probably watching from somewhere nearby. The weight of truth pressed against her chest like a physical force, demanding to be spoken even as her practical mind screamed warnings about the consequences. Yes, she said quietly, I have observed a mountain lion on my property. Agent Morrison's eyebrows rose slightly. Recently? She's been here for 3 weeks. The silence that followed was profound. Tom Bradley's face showed shock and concern, while Marcus stepped instinctively closer to his father. Agent Morrison's expression remained carefully neutral, but his hand moved closer to his sidearm. Mrs. Sullivan, Morrison said slowly, are you telling me you've been knowingly harboring a dangerous predator? I'm telling you I've been providing sanctuary for an injured animal who needed help to survive. Catherine, Tom interrupted, his voice heavy with worry. Do you understand what you're saying? Mountain lions are killers. They can't be tamed or trusted. Catherine felt a familiar surge of the confidence Sierra had helped her rediscover. With respect, Tom, you're wrong. At least about this one. She turned toward the barn and called softly, Sierra, it's all right. Come out! Agent Morrison's hand went to his weapon as a golden shadow emerged from behind the building. Sierra moved with liquid grace, her amber eyes assessing the 3 men before fixing on Catherine. Without hesitation, the mountain lion walked to Catherine's side and settled into a relaxed sitting position. Close enough to touch but clearly unthreatened by the human company, the silence stretched impossibly long. Marcus Bradley's mouth hung open in amazement, while his father seemed frozen between terror and fascination. Agent Morrison stared at the scene with the expression of a man watching the laws of nature rewrite themselves. How is this possible? Morrison finally managed. She was injured when she first came here, Catherine explained, her hand resting gently on Sierra's neck. I could have shot her, probably should have, by conventional wisdom. But she looked at me with such desperate need, such intelligence. I couldn't turn her away, and she just stayed. She chose to stay. There's a difference. Catherine told them about the healing process, about Sierra's careful respect for boundaries, about the territorial display that had protected Catherine's livestock just days earlier. With each detail, the men's expression shifted from skepticism to amazement to something approaching awe. She defended your cattle? Tom asked, his voice barely above a whisper. From a much larger male who would have killed them, Sierra chose to protect what she considers her territory, which apparently includes my ranch and everything on it. Agent Morrison circled slowly around Catherine and Sierra, observing their interaction with professional interest. In 20 years of wildlife management, I've never seen anything like this. Mountain lions don't form attachments to humans. They're solitary predators with no capacity for... He stopped mid-sentence as Sierra rose and walked calmly to the water trough, completely ignoring the armed strangers as she drank. The casual trust she displayed in the presence of potential threats spoke more powerfully than any of Catherine's words. The question, Morrison continued, is what we do about it. Technically, you're in violation of territorial wildlife statutes, harboring a dangerous animal, failing to report predator presence. I could have you arrested. Catherine felt her newfound courage falter slightly, but Sierra's warm presence against her leg steadied her resolve. Then arrest me, but you're not taking her. Catherine, be reasonable, Tom pleaded. Think about your neighbors, your safety, the precedent this sets. What if everyone starts trying to domesticate wild predators? I haven't domesticated her, Catherine replied firmly. Sierra remains completely wild. She hunts, she maintains her natural behaviors, she could leave any time she chooses. The only difference is that she's chosen to include me in her territory. Agent Morrison studied the unlikely pair for a long moment. Mrs. Sullivan, what you've accomplished here challenges everything we understand about predator behavior. From a scientific standpoint, it's remarkable. From a legal standpoint, it's problematic. From a practical standpoint, he paused, watching Sierra return to Catherine's side with the easy confidence of a creature completely at peace with her environment. From a practical standpoint, it seems to be working. Marcus Bradley found his voice at last. Pa, look at her. She's not acting like a wild animal. She's acting like a really big cat that trusts Mrs. Sullivan completely. Tom's expression softened as he observed the genuine affection between woman and mountain lion. I have to admit, Catherine, she doesn't seem dangerous. Not to you, anyway. Agent Morrison made a decision that would change everything. Mrs. Sullivan, I'm going to make an unusual recommendation. Instead of citing you for violations, I'm going to document this as a unique case study. If Sierra continues to demonstrate the behaviors you've described, no livestock predation, no threat to neighbors, voluntary restriction to your territory, then perhaps we can establish a precedent for managed coexistence. Catherine felt tears of relief and gratitude threaten to spill over. You mean she can stay? I mean, you can both prove that the impossible is actually possible. But this arrangement will be watched, documented, and evaluated continuously. One incident, one threat to public safety, and it ends immediately. As the men prepared to leave, Tom Bradley approached Catherine with newfound respect in his eyes. I owe you an apology, Catherine. I thought grief had made you reckless. Instead, it seems to have made you brave. Not brave, Catherine corrected, stroking Sierra's golden fur. Just finally willing to risk everything for something that matters. Spring brought changes to the Utah territory that seemed to reflect the transformation in Catherine's life. Snow melted from the red rock canyons, revealing wildflowers that painted the landscape in brilliant purples and yellows. Catherine's ranch, once a place of solitary survival, had become something entirely new, a sanctuary where the impossible had taken root and flourished. Sierra's presence had fundamentally altered not just Catherine's daily routine, but her entire relationship with the land around her. Together, they'd developed a partnership that defied every conventional understanding of predator-human interaction. The mountain lion had proven herself to be more than just a guardian of Catherine's livestock. She'd become an early warning system for weather changes, a deterrent to other predators, and even an unexpected help with ranch management. Sierra could locate injured or lost cattle faster than any human tracker, leading Catherine to animals that needed attention with an efficiency that bordered on supernatural. You're showing off, Catherine teased one morning as Sierra led her directly to a calf that had gotten separated from the herd and trapped in a narrow canyon wash. Making me look like the best rancher in the territory when we both know you're doing most of the work. Sierra's rumbling purr suggested she was entirely satisfied with this arrangement. Word of their unusual partnership had spread throughout the region, bringing visitors from as far as Salt Lake City. Scientists, writers, and curious travelers made pilgrimages to Catherine's ranch to witness what many called the miracle of the mountain lion. Not all attention was welcome. Some visitors came with skepticism that bordered on hostility, convinced that Catherine was somehow deceiving the public or endangering the community. But Sierra had an uncanny ability to read human intentions, remaining hidden when unwelcome guests arrived and appearing only for those who came with genuine curiosity and respect. "She's smarter than most people I know," Agent Morrison observed during one of his monthly visits. He'd become a regular presence, documenting Sierra's behavior for what would eventually become a groundbreaking study on human-wildlife coexistence. "Watch how she evaluates each new person before deciding whether to reveal herself." Catherine had learned to trust Sierra's judgment about people completely. The mountain lion's assessment of human character proved more accurate than her own instincts, leading to friendships Catherine would never have developed on her own and warning her away from visitors who harbored hidden agendas. The most meaningful transformation came in Catherine's relationship with her neighbors. Tom Bradley had become not just a friend but an advocate, helping to manage the stream of visitors and protecting Catherine's privacy when the attention became overwhelming. Other ranchers who'd initially viewed her with suspicion gradually came to respect both her courage and the practical benefits of her unique situation. "Haven't lost a single head of cattle to predators since Sierra arrived," noted Jacob Mueller, whose property bordered Catherine's to the south. "Whatever she's doing to keep other mountain lions away, it's working better than any hunting party we've ever organized." Sierra's territorial protection extended beyond Catherine's immediate property. The female mountain lion had claimed a range that included several neighboring ranches, creating a buffer zone where livestock predation had virtually disappeared. Other mountain lions seemed to understand that this territory was occupied by a formidable defender and sought easier hunting grounds elsewhere. But the deepest change was in Catherine herself. The woman who'd spent 2 years after her husband's death building walls against further loss had rediscovered her capacity for love, trust, and hope. Sierra had taught her that healing didn't require forgetting or protecting oneself from all future pain. It required opening one's heart to new possibilities, even when those possibilities seemed impossible. "I never expected this," Catherine confided to Sierra one evening as they shared their ritual sunset watch. "When I opened that gate for you, I thought I was just helping an injured animal. I had no idea I was saving myself." Sierra's response was to move closer, settling herself against Catherine's legs with the casual affection of a creature who knew she was unconditionally loved. The mountain lion had grown sleek and strong under Catherine's care, her golden coat glowing with health, her amber eyes bright with contentment. As summer deepened, Catherine began to notice subtle changes in Sierra's behavior. The mountain lion spent longer periods away from the ranch, ranging farther into the high country during her daily hunts. She'd begun calling, deep, echoing vocalizations that carried for miles across the canyon country. "You're calling to your own kind," Catherine observed with a mixture of pride and apprehension. "Looking for a mate, maybe? Thinking about starting a family of your own?" The possibility that Sierra might eventually choose to leave, to return to a fully wild life, had always existed in the back of Catherine's mind. She'd known from the beginning that their partnership was built on Sierra's freedom to choose, and that choice might someday lead away from the ranch. But as she watched Sierra's obvious contentment, her deep attachment to the territory they'd built together, Catherine allowed herself to hope that love might prove stronger than instinct. The answer to Sierra's calls came on a crisp October morning, when Catherine woke to find 2 sets of tracks in the frost outside her barn. Sierra's familiar paw prints alongside those of a large male mountain lion. Her heart clenched with the realization she'd been dreading. Sierra had found a mate. Catherine dressed quickly and stepped outside, expecting to find her beloved companion gone, returned to the wild life she'd briefly left behind. Instead, she discovered Sierra waiting on the porch as always, but not alone. 20 feet away, partially hidden in the shadows of the cottonwood grove, stood the largest mountain lion Catherine had ever seen. His coat was darker than Sierra's, marked with battle scars that spoke of a life fully lived in the wilderness. His amber eyes held the wary intelligence of a predator who'd survived by trusting nothing and no one. "So you've brought him home to meet me," Catherine said softly, settling into her usual chair. "I suppose that's only proper." Sierra rose and walked to Catherine's side, but her attention was focused on the male, communicating something in the subtle language of mountain lions that Catherine could only guess at. The big cat remained motionless, clearly torn between his natural fear of humans and his interest in Sierra. "His name is Canyon," Sierra seemed to say through her posture and gaze, though Catherine knew she was projecting human concepts onto feline behavior. Still, the male's bearing suggested strength, dignity, and the kind of wild nobility that complemented Sierra's own character perfectly. For 3 days, Canyon remained at the edge of Catherine's property, never approaching closer but never leaving. Catherine found herself providing food for 2 mountain lions, leaving portions of meat at the boundary of her comfort zone, while Canyon learned to trust this strange human who'd somehow earned Sierra's complete devotion. "You're asking him to accept me," Catherine realized on the 3rd evening, watching Sierra move between her 2 worlds, the domestic comfort of the ranch and the wild freedom represented by Canyon. "You won't choose one or the other. You want both." The breakthrough came when Canyon finally approached close enough for Catherine to see the intelligence in his eyes, the curiosity that warred with caution. Sierra had apparently spent days explaining this unusual arrangement, and Canyon was ready to test whether a human could truly be trusted.